The summer the sky turned the color of a bruised peach. My son brought home his best friend. The wind had blown the scent of smoke all the way to Santa Cruz, and ash dusted the hibiscus leaves like pollen gone wrong. Tyler shouldered open the front door with a damp towel and a grin that reminded me of fifth-grade field days and skinned knees. "Mom, this is Jim," he said, like I hadn't met the name in 100 stories already. "His folks are staying with his aunt in Gilroy, but it's crowded. He'll crash in the den for a while." "That cool?" The boy, no, the young man, behind him managed a careful smile. Jim was all collarbones and summer, sun-freckled where a lifeguard's shirt might end. He carried his own folded blanket like a promise not to need too much. I saw the polite way he waited, how he kept his gaze on the hallway rug and the framed picture of Tyler at 14, holding a beat-up surfboard like a sword. "Of course," I said. The smoke in the air made my voice hoarse, or maybe it was the sudden memory of being 19 and certain the world would bend if I only pushed hard enough. Tyler thumped upstairs to dump his backpack, leaving the two of us alone with the quiet thrum of the house and the persistent ticking of the kitchen clock. "Thank you, Ms. Hart," Jim said, low enough you had to lean toward him to hear. "Amanda," I corrected gently. "Ms. Hart makes me feel like I should assign you homework." He laughed, a small surprise thing. "Amanda. Thanks." We got used to each other by not looking too closely. Mornings began with the kettle and the gulls arguing over the alley, with Tyler wobbling on his way to an early shift and Jim careful with dishes, stacking plates like seashells. He had the kind of manners that come from living in other people's spaces. When I found him folding towels the same precise way I did, I wanted to say, "You don't have to earn it. Your place here," but pride is fragile at 19. I let him keep it. The beach bled into our days, even when the air tasted wrong. We wore masks before noon when the wind tilted north. In the afternoons, we drove the coastline with the windows cracked just enough to pretend we could breathe. Tyler talked, Jim listened, and I watched them in the rearview. Two boys I'd once ferried to Little League, now shoulder to shoulder like a double exposure. One night the power cut out without ceremony. The house exhaled and everything went still. No fridge hum, no compressor wheeze from the neighbor's garage. Tyler cursed from upstairs. I found candles in the cupboard, jam jars that made clumsy lanterns. The three of us sat at the dining table like a family made of shadows, playing gin rummy by candlelight. Tyler accused us of conspiring whenever Jim won. Jim blushed and shrugged, and I caught myself noticing how he moved with the card deck. Deft, careful, hands that knew how to be gentle. Around 10, Tyler retreated to his room with a muttered "work at 6, leaving his phone charging off a battery brick the size of a sandwich. The house settled like a cat. I collected plates. Jim started to help, and our hands met on the same glass. Heat traveled faster than it should. "Sorry," he murmured, withdrawing too quickly and bumping the table, jostling the candle. He steadied it with both palms, eyes flickering to me and away. In that gold light, he looked younger and older at once, the way the ocean looks shallow until you step in and the sand vanishes beneath your feet. "It's fine," I said. My voice did that breathy thing it hadn't done in years. I didn't like it. I liked it too much. In the dark kitchen we made iced tea by flashlight, a ridiculous ritual that felt ceremonial. He told me about the fire, how the ridge lit up like a necklace someone had snapped, amber beads rushing toward the valley. He told me how his mother cried over photo albums they hadn't opened in years, how his father joked about roasting marshmallows to hide the way his voice shook. "You ever think about how fast it can all change?" he asked, leaning against the counter. Outside, the wind was dying, and the night had the wet wool smell it gets just before dawn. "All the time," I said. "Sometimes it feels like the only honest thing in the world." He watched me for a moment like he was memorizing the words, then stared down at the condensation slipping from his glass. "I didn't want to be a burden." "You aren't," I said too quickly. "Slow down. You aren't, Jim." He nodded, but his shoulders stayed tight. "I can help around the house. Seriously. Paint, fix, weed, whatever." "Deal," I said, because letting him give something back was kinder than insisting he stop. We shook on it. His hand warm, mine colder than I'd meant it to be, and when the power stuttered back alive, the air seemed thinner. He released my hand like surf sliding back from shore. As July shouldered its way in, the skies cleared by inches. We learned which winds favored which afternoons, and which stretches of shoreline stayed quiet even on weekends. Tyler's schedule went weird. Sunrise inventory, surprise double shifts because summer tourists forget sunscreen and common sense. The house's orbit shifted without announcing it. Some mornings it was just Jim and me at the table. His guitar propped by the sliding door like a third person. He wasn't great, not yet, but he had taste. He played songs that made me remember things. A Blue Nile melody that unspooled memory like film, a cheap guitar cover of a song I'd danced to at 20 in a bar that smelled like spilled cider and brine. "You know this?" he'd ask, incredulous when I hummed along. "My dad loves the old stuff," he'd add, and I'd laugh because old is a word that can wound when you don't mean it to. We painted the back fence together in late afternoon light that made everything feel like a movie. I wore a cotton dress I didn't mind ruining, and he wore a t-shirt cut open at the collar. The air tasted like creosote and eucalyptus, and our banter sounded suspiciously like flirting to my own ears. "Higher," I told him, tapping the unpainted board with the brush handle. "You missed a spot." "You volunteer to spot me?" he asked, 1 foot on the bottom rung of the ladder and a grin that was mostly safety but not entirely. I rolled my eyes and planted the ladder anyway. "I volunteer to make sure you don't fall on my rosemary bush." He climbed 2 rungs, stretching all long lines and nerve. For a second the ladder wobbled, just enough to jolt a breath out of him. I grabbed, he steadied, paint spattered my wrist. He looked down, face divided by sun and shadow. "I've got me," he said softly. "I know," I said, and kept my hands on the ladder because sometimes you hold on for you, not for them. By the time Tyler got home, our forearms were a map of paint flecks and the fence glowed like a new tooth. Tyler laughed at us and took a picture anyway, then made a joke about exploiting free labor. Jim leaned into it. "House rules," he said. "Pay in tacos." "Deal," I said, glad for the normalness, the way it fooled my chest into relaxing. Later, when the house went quiet and the ocean threw up its usual rumor against the night, I told myself this was ordinary. A kid in transition, a home opening its door, a woman old enough to know better navigating carefully. But the air that night smelled like sun-warmed wood and something bright, and when I finally slept, I dreamed of the fence flaring into a bonfire, all that fresh paint turning to light. In the dream I reached out to shield it with my hands and ended up warming them over the flame. Californians call it June gloom like a joke, but July can brood too. The fog rolled in on certain mornings like a mood, the pier vanishing halfway into the gray, the surfers ghostly as seals. When the sun finally burned through at noon, you could feel the collective gratitude, people looking up like flowers. I ran the check-in desk at a community arts nonprofit 3 days a week and orchestrated beach cleanups the other 2. It made me sound purposeful when people asked, and it kept me close to the water. Tyler came to 1 cleanup, then snagged extra shifts at work and turned into vapor until dinner time. Jim came every time, even when he'd worked late at the pool, even when the trash bags filled with sand and beer bottle glass and 1,000 cigarette ends and it felt like trying to empty the ocean with a spoon. "Why do people do this?" he asked, crouched to pry a tangle of plastic ribbon from the rack line. "Because they forget they live in a place," I said. "Because they think it's theirs to use up." He looked at me with that careful listening that always made me hyper-aware of my own words. "You talk like you write songs." I made a face. "Please." The last song I wrote had 4 lines and was about a rabbit who refused to wear socks. "Solid hook," he deadpanned. I snorted, and he grinned, nudging my shoulder with his. "You should write," he added, less kidding. "You notice things." We noticed each other more too. Not by design. We were simply the ones in the kitchen when the kettle clicked, the ones who reached for the broom when something spilled. The smallness of the house made intimacy unavoidable. Our job was to discipline it. So we did. We kept our sentences neat. We overlapped in the garden, not in hallways. When we did touch, a sleeve brushed, a shoulder knocked, my hand at the small of his back as I scooted by him at the sink, we pretended not to notice the way heat unspooled. One warm Saturday we drove down to Big Sur for paint and the sort of overpriced hardware that makes you feel like you're doing something permanent. Tyler was supposed to come. His boss texted a crisis and he vaporized again. So it was Jim in the passenger seat of my old Subaru. Windows down, music tasting like salt. Hairpins on Highway 1 turned the drive into an act of trust. Cliff to our right, ocean to our left, the world simplified to 2 impossible blues. Jim sang along to a song I knew in college. harmonizing without thinking. I wanted to tell him he had a good ear. I didn't because compliments have a way of becoming currency. We stopped at a turnout where tourists took long-armed selfies with the bridge soaring behind them. The wind tried to steal the sound of everything. We leaned against the guardrail, hair furious, eyes streaming, laughing just to prove we were alive. When I tucked my hair behind my ear and it ripped away again, Jim reached without looking and did it for me. A simple, thoughtless kindness that turned thought into a live wire. My breath caught, ridiculous, dramatic. His hand hung there a second too long. He seemed to realize it and withdrew, apologizing with his whole face. "Sorry," he said. "It's okay," I said over the wind. "I forget I'm not a picture in a magazine." "You're better," he said, and then, hearing himself, added hastily, "I mean you're real." The comment sat between us like warm quartz. We let the wind erode it. A minute later we were both pointing at pelicans drafting in formation, discussing the geometry of flight. On the way back, the sky did that California trick where one side of the world goes dark while the other pretends it's still 3 in the afternoon. Felt like driving between lives. We bought tacos in a shack that leaned like a tired man. We ate them on the hood of the car, grease tremoring down our wrists, laughter easy again. On impulse I took a picture. His profile, the line of coast, the way the late light put a thin gold line around him. When I looked later, the photo made me ache. Not just for him, but for the entire category of days that feel like they're setting up a memory. The week after, we painted the last of the fence and started on the porch rail. The latter scene repeated itself, gentle as a joke. He steadied me this time when the rung protested under my foot, hands firm around my calf. The touch was practical, necessary, and still my stomach did a tumble that felt both young and treacherous. "Maybe we should get a new ladder," he said, once I'd descended safely. "Maybe," I said, hearing layers in the word. Neighbors stopped to chat, the way summer invites witness. Mrs. D'Ambrosio across the street complimented Jim's diligence and told me, not unkindly, that I was lucky to have such enthusiastic help around the house. Her eyes lingered a moment longer than usual. I swallowed, pinned a smile where it belonged, and asked after her dahlias. When we were alone, Jim leaned against the porch column. "You okay?" "Fine," I said too quickly. I wiped paint from my fingers with a rag. People like to narrate other people's lives. It's easier than tending to their own. He frowned. "They don't know us." "They think they do," I said, and realized the words applied to me too. That night, Tyler came home with a tension I recognized. The knot you tie yourself when you're 19 and you think there's only one right way to stand. He was civil, but his eyes flicked between us too long when we passed each other a bowl. Later I heard their voices in the den, not angry exactly but pitched. I hovered in the hallway like a ghost until I caught Jim's steady calm, the way he said, "Dude, stop. It's not like that," and my son's stubborn silence. I hissed myself away to bed. I dreamt of Bixby Bridge that night, of the felted fog and the improbable curve over nothing. In the dream I was both the driver and the passenger. In the dream the car took the turn a little too fast, and I felt the wheels skim gravel. When I woke, my heart was in my mouth like the moment just after a confession, when the words have leapt and you can't catch them. A week later came the 4th of July. Bonfires all up the shore, sky battles over Capitola, everyone behaving like fireworks were sensible things that belonged to people. Tyler claimed a stretch of beach with friends. He asked me to come and rolled his eyes when I said I had work early. "You're coming after," he insisted, and I promised I would. Jim went with him, board under his arm in the late afternoon like a flag. I arrived after 10 to a beach punched full of light. The ocean boomed like a big laugh trying to be discreet. Tyler was easy to find, the tallest flame often is. Jim sat just outside the bonfire circumference with his guitar, fingers worrying a familiar chord progression into something tender. A girl I didn't know leaned into him with the particular boldness of summer. He smiled at her with the politeness of someone who doesn't want to hurt a stranger's feelings. Jealousy is a humiliating emotion, scorched and petty. I stood in the dark and felt it anyway. Then I moved because standing still inside a feeling only makes it grow. Tyler hugged me like a kid, fiercely, smelling like smoke and salt. "You came," he said, triumphant. "Jim's got a song now." "Oh yeah," I teased, nodding toward the guitar. "Can I hear this world premiere?" Jim's eyes found mine, and the noise of the beach went soft. He began to play. Not a love song. Play song. He'd stolen fragments of the ocean's argument and braided them with the off-key patriotism of fireworks and the rhythm of bare feet thumping damp sand. He sang low because the melody didn't need to win. It just needed to be true. The girl drifted away. Tyler leaned back on his hands, the way he used to lie on lawns to find constellations. I let the music hold my own hands for me, because they didn't know where to rest. When it ended, people clapped the way you clap for a sunset someone else points out. Grateful, a little sheepish. Jim set the guitar down like you set down a promise you aren't sure you can keep. He stood and walked toward the waves as if he'd just remembered something he'd left there. I followed, ridiculous, because self-control is easier in crowds and harder beneath an indifferent moon. We stood ankle deep. The water startled us both into laughter. "You're shivering," he said. "I'm fine," I said, lying. A wave flung pebbles around our feet like broken jewelry. "You weren't jealous, were you?" he asked suddenly, turning to me with a half-smile that tried to make a joke of it. The night was loud. The words felt private anyway. I opened my mouth and then closed it, because honesty is a door that once opened stays. "I don't get to be," I said carefully. He nodded, eyes on the black water. "I know." We didn't say anything for a long time, and the silence didn't hurt. When we walked back, he kept pace with me, and when our arms brushed, neither of us shied away. Tyler hooped at something a friend shouted. The sky sparkled and spilled. I felt like the bridge again, spanning a mess of air and light, and for the first time, I wondered which side of the canyon I was really heading toward. The phone call came in the hollow part of the afternoon, the hour when the house holds its breath between day and evening. Jim picked up in the den. I heard his voice break on "Mom." The words that followed were pieces. Insurance adjuster, structural damage, months. He listened the way he does everything, focused still, and when he hung up, he stared at the blue and white striped rug like it was a sea he could fall into. I stood in the doorway. "You want tea or silence?" He huffed out a laugh without much air in it. "Silence, please. With lemon." We sat. Lemon slices sweated on the counter. He told me his family couldn't go back for the rest of the summer, maybe the year. He told me his father wanted to take an extra shift in Monterey. His mother wanted to pretend the kitchen could hold grief the way it held steam. He told me how guilt felt heavier than smoke. "Guilt for what?" I asked. "For being okay," he said, voice low. "Sometimes I'm happy here." He looked up fast, as if he'd broken a rule. I mean I miss them." "But I know what you mean," I said, because I did. Happiness can be treacherous when the world is burning. A few days later, an email arrived for him that felt like a door. A music program in Los Angeles. Not a conservatory, but serious enough to turn his love into work. He'd sent a late audition on a whim. They liked Wim. They had a spot for him in August. Tuition not terrible but not nothing. He held the printed letter like a bird and told me he couldn't ask his parents for more than they were already giving the world. "You don't have to ask them," I said before I could stop myself. "There's a fund at the Arts Center for exactly this, for people displaced or disrupted who need a bridge. I can't promise, but I can write a recommendation." He looked like I had offered him my own lungs. "I can't. I don't want, Amanda, you've already." "This isn't me," I said, and the truth was slippery. "It's the community. I just know how to ask it to pay attention." He rubbed his fingers over the paper's edge like a rosary. "My dad won't take charity." "Then don't call it that," I said softly. "Call it a scholarship, a grant, a bet." He shook his head, pride and need fighting under the skin. "Let me think." "Okay," I said, because pushing someone you care about is a way to make them run. "Think." Tyler was short with me that week, and shorter with Jim. He'd enter a room and the barometric pressure would drop, even if the day was bright. I asked him what he wanted for dinner. He said, "Whatever." I asked what shift he'd pulled. He said, "Late." I asked if he was okay. He said, "Fine," in the tone that means precisely not fine. When the fourth was replaced by ordinary nights, our walls lost the excuse of noise. I heard a door slam. I heard the guitar stop mid-song. The next Saturday, a rare summer storm paraded up the coast. Not rain enough to matter, just thunder like furniture dragged across a giant's floor. The porch smelled like everything it had ever been. Fresh paint and ocean and damp wood. Tyler was out. Jim and I stood under the eave and watched lightning flicker like someone playing with the room's dimmer. "Feels wrong," he said. "Weather like this." "Feels right," I countered. "Like the skies practicing honesty for once." He looked at me then, really looked, as if weather had stripped the house to studs and found us inside. The space between us thinned to something you could fold and slip into a pocket. He reached without asking and took my hand. It wasn't dramatic. Felt like a fact. "I can't do this," I said immediately, uselessly. Something in me already doing exactly this. "I know." He didn't let go. "Neither can I." We stood there for a long time, the thunder moving farther out, the smell of ozone giving way to the ordinary night. When he finally released my hand, the absence felt like a bruise. He laughed, breath messy. "I should write to the program." "You should," I said, grateful for the ladder down. "I'll write my part tonight." He opened his mouth to protest. I lifted a hand. "It's not charity, Jim. It's the right story told to the right person at the right time." He nodded. "You're good at stories." "I'm trying to write a better one," I said before I could stop myself. I typed the recommendation after midnight, the house quiet except for the refrigerator speaking its small domestic language. I used words like discipline and promise and community, and I meant them. I wrote about the beach cleanups, the mornings he showed up the way the tide does, reliable, necessary. I wrote about the song he'd written by the fire without saying it was for me, because it wasn't, not really. It was for a place. I didn't write about the porch. I signed my name like a binding. Tyler found the printed copy the next day because of course he did. It was face down on the dining table, and he flipped it while hunting for his keys. He read the first lines and smiled, proud by reflex, and then his face changed in a way that felt like the room tilting. "What is this?" he asked. Not angry, not yet, just shocked. "A recommendation," I said, keeping my voice steady. "For Jim's program." His eyes flicked to mine and then back to the page, as if staring directly would burn. "Why are you writing this like you?" he swallowed. When he looked up again, the space between us was a canyon. "Is there something I should know?" The truth hovered like a housefly, annoying and relentless. I killed it with the nearest words. "I'm proud of him," I said. "He's done good work. He deserves someone to say so." Tyler's jaw moved, a tic he inherited from his father. "You don't write this way about me. You don't let me." The sentence flashed through. I didn't say it. "It's different," I said carefully. "This is an application. It's formal." "Right," he said. The word had edges. "Right." He grabbed his keys and left because leaving is the most seductive thing grief offers you. I stood in the kitchen and told myself this was what choice feels like. Not a clean yes followed by a clean no, but a series of small adjustments to a path you didn't think you were on. That night, the storm had left the air washed and eerie. Jim came home late from a shift, hair damp, shirt clinging in a way that shouldn't have registered and did. He saw my face and knew. "He saw the letter," he said, not asking. "He did." "Is he angry?" I said. "Mostly at me. Some at you. A lot at everything." He nodded like he'd been expecting that particular weather front. "I'll talk to him. Give him a day," I said. "Give me one." He looked like he wanted to reach for me again and didn't. "Okay." I wanted to say 1,000 things that the house didn't have room for. Instead I said, "We'll get through the next few days. Then you'll go to LA and make people cry in small clubs, and the world will keep spinning." He smiled at that, relief and ache at the edges. "Come visit," he said, and the words landed in my chest like a dove that wasn't sure whether to stay. "Maybe I will," I said, meaning, if the story lets me. The acceptance email came 2 mornings later. Subject line plain as bread. The scholarship committee approved a grant equal to half tuition, with a note about resilience and artistic contribution that made me blink hard. I forwarded it to Jim and then walked into the garden and pressed my fingers into the dirt like a prayer. He found me a minute later, breathless, barefoot, phone in hand. "Amanda." I looked up. "Jim." We laughed and then hugged in the bright, unambiguous light of day. It lasted 1 beat too long. When we stepped back, both of us knew it. Tyler came home at noon to grab his wetsuit. He saw our faces and put it together in the particular merciless way the young do. "So he's going," he said. Not a question. "Yes," I said. "He got the scholarship." "Of course he did," Tyler said, and his smile was a cut. "With your help." "Ty," Jim began, hands up, body small the way you get when you don't want to look like a threat. "Don't," Tyler snapped, the word whittled to a point. He turned to me. "You know what everyone's saying. That you're that this." He made a helpless, angry sound. "He's my friend." "I know," I said, which was both confession and defense. "Then act like it," he shot back. The room shrank. I can't be here right now." He left for the beach and didn't come home for hours. I paced the house like it was a map to a treasure I'd lost and didn't deserve to find again. Jim packed and repacked the same backpack like a charm. When Tyler finally returned after sunset, hair sea-wet, eyes red in that way that turns a mother into an animal, I met him at the door. "We need to talk," I said. "About what?" he asked, exhausted sarcasm dropping his voice a register. "About how I love you," I said, because the shortest path between points is not a straight line. It's the truth. "And how I didn't plan any of this. And how I'm trying not to hurt you, even though I seem to be failing." He pinched the bridge of his nose, a gesture that looked absurdly adult on his too young face. "I don't want to hear that." "You don't have to," I said. "But I'm saying it anyway because you deserve the thing in my head, not the quiet that lets you invent worse." He leaned against the wall and stared at the floor. Are you? I don't even know what I'm asking." I swallowed. "Nothing happened," I said, and felt the word's inadequacy like a splinter. "We didn't." I stopped. "We felt things. We tried not to." "He's leaving." Tyler's laugh was a sound I'd never heard from him. "Oh, that makes it fine." "It doesn't," I said. "It makes it true." He shook his head, grief stretching him thin. "I'm not a kid," he said. "But I feel like one. Is that what this is? You get to be young and I have to be old." The question broke something in me. "I don't want to be young," I said. "I want to be honest. I want to be decent. I want to make good choices. Sometimes those things don't match. I'm sorry." He looked at me for a long time, and in that look I saw all the versions of him I'd carried. The toddler with ketchup cheeks, the middle schooler who held his breath underwater too long, the teenager who texted me from the driveway to say, "Come watch the sunset," the almost man trying to measure edge and center. His shoulders slumped. He nodded once, a compromise between resignation and mercy. "I'm still mad," he said. "You're allowed," I said. "I'll get over it," he added, and the fragile bridge lowered between us. "Not today." "Not today," I agreed. He went to shower. I found Jim in the den, sitting on the rolled-out futon like a traveler in a train station. "How bad?" he asked. "It's not good," I said. "But it will be." He nodded. "I'll tell him goodbye at the beach tomorrow. Give you both space." "No," I said, surprising myself. "We say goodbye here. In the kitchen. In the morning with coffee. Simple. Real." He looked relieved and devastated in the same frame. "Okay." That night the house made its little noises, pipes ticking, a branch scratching the side yard fence, and I lay awake cataloging sensations to avoid the one large one. The sheet was cool. A car cruised the street too slowly and didn't stop. The ocean performed consistency. When sleep finally took me, it brought a dream of a movie theater with the wrong film playing, and everyone pretending it was fine. In the morning the light was square and honest on the tile. Poured coffee. Jim carried his backpack to the door before doubling back, as if his feet had been divided in a custody battle. We stood on opposite sides of the island. The mug in my hand made a small moon of steam. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. "You already did," I said. "Every day by not making this harder than it needed to be." His laugh was watery. "Can I?" He gestured, as if requesting permission to breathe. He nodded. He walked around the island and we held each other like the cleanest lie. Just a hug, and I knew better than to pretend. His breath was in my hair, my cheek against his collarbone, the plane of his back under my palms as real as gravity. We didn't say the words people say at airports because they would have turned us into a scene. We stood there until my timer hissed for the muffins I'd put in as a safeguard against too much silence. When we let go, his eyes were bright. He leaned in, paused, waited for the tiniest nod, and kissed me. It wasn't a future. It wasn't a cheat. It was a yes to a feeling we had refused a dozen different ways. It tasted like coffee and salt and something else I'm not brave enough to name. He stepped back first. "Okay," he said, steadying himself on the edge of the counter like he'd stood up too fast. "Okay. Go," I said, and I didn't mean it in the way movies mean it. I meant pick up your life and carry it where it needs to go. He slung the backpack on, wiped his eyes with the side of his hand like a little boy embarrassed to be caught crying, and left. I watched him walk down the front steps and turn left toward the bus stop, that small human figure set against summer glare. I didn't cry right away. I cleaned the kitchen with a zeal that would have frightened saints. I texted Tyler a heart and a wave emoji and then sent words too. "I love you. I'm here." He replied with a single thumb up, which is the digital equivalent of a nod across a difficult room. August lapped forward the way months do, unbothered by our dramas. Jim wrote sometimes, real emails, paragraphy, unafraid. He told me about a professor who wore cowboy boots and assigned silence as a homework exercise. He told me about open mics where the room pretended to be jaded and then cried anyway. He told me about a kid from Bakersfield who could make a harmonica sound like a train leaving and arriving at once. He didn't tell me he missed me. I didn't tell him I missed him. We didn't need to. The words were there between the lines like low tide lines the shore. Tyler softened slowly. The way swells after rain and then settles again. We sat on the porch most evenings, the repaired ladder leaning like a joke we shared. He told me about a manager who finally noticed he had a brain. I told him about a grant that came through for new easels and how the preschoolers made more art than walls could hold. Sometimes we watched surfers paddle past the break and marveled at their patience, at the way they measured their bodies against what they couldn't control and called it sport. In September, the sky was blue like a dare. Jim texted a photo of a crumpled takeout bag and the caption, "Dinner of Champions." I sent a picture of Tyler and me holding a crooked bookshelf we'd built, sawdust in our hair, the caption, "Architects of Dubious Merit." We learned a new language. Proud without possessive, tender without claim. Years will do what they always do, unspooling behind us, slipping new summers over old bones. I don't know what happens next. I know the coast is never the same twice, erosion doing its slow holy work. I know the porch is sturdy. I know the ladder holds. I know I am the age I am and that honesty is not a young person's sport. It's for anyone brave enough to stand on a moving shoreline and say this is where I am. Sometimes when the evening turns peach and the gulls get talkative, I take out the photo from Big Sur. The one with the impossible bridge and the late light gilding the edge of a 19-year-old boy who is not a boy, who understood in a season what some of us take decades to admit, that love is not always a door you walk through. Sometimes it's the hand you don't take and the story you tell well enough that it carries you to the other side anyway.